Welcome back to the Darkest Theory podcast. I am your host, ScrapBrain, along with Subtle. How's it going, dude?
What's going on?
So, Tuesday, just a couple days ago at this point, we got the release of the new chapter in transmission. So, we get the singularity. Subtle refers to him as Hux. And we also got Gabriel Soma. So, we're going to kind of dig into that. Uh, So starting off, first impressions from the PTB to the live server, we had some changes. We've talked about that before. The number of crates where the EMPs are able to be picked up has been decreased from 7 to 5, making it harder to have a continuous supply of EMPs. Also, the starting timer for getting EMPs has gone up from 60 seconds to 80 seconds. And that makes the killer feel a lot more reasonable. During the PTB, it felt like people would just spam EMPs because there was no penalty to do so. And they've become a little harder to get, but as we'll talk about, like, it's still not quite enough. And they've kind of hinted at some changes that they're thinking about doing. But Soto, you've been playing Hux quite a bit. What are your thoughts on him so far?
Yeah, playing as him is actually really fun. He plays in a lot more. They've put in a lot of like countermeasures to like camping and like 3 gens, and the EMPs are pretty devastating for the pods in terms of them like kind of sitting around generators. Like they get deactivated for a substantial amount of time, so you'd have to go and manually reset them up. So you have to go walk to them on foot. So there's plenty of stuff in the game to prevent those kind of things from being abused, having like eyes kind of spread throughout the map, similar to the way a lot of the complaints about like Skull Merchant, for example, or like Knight being able to send guards sort of over a long distance. He feels really fun to play in Chase. They're having a really good understanding of maps and understanding like where you're allowed to place the pods and stuff on walls or like random trees is it allows you some like creativity in terms of like trying to set up for ahead of time at some like notable loops. Like just having one kind of on the inside of Shack is something that's kind of been like a go-to, where it's just I know that if they're going to run through there, since there's kind of line of sight, if I'm outside and they're inside, I can just kind of switch in and either tag them or just get the teleport immediately. So he feels like pretty rewarding and has like a lot of different ways to play him, and the maps also keep him feeling pretty fresh because every map is so different. So I've enjoyed him. The EMPs, like you said, are I think still they're definitely better than what they were on the PTB, but they still feel a little too easy to get. And the fact that like teammates can kind of just swoop in pretty easily, and like if the survivors sort of play in bursts where it's like you wait until everyone has like an EMP in hand, you just have like such a long amount of time to basically deactivate his power if anyone gets tagged, or be able to like keep generators from being patrolled by the biopods. They can pretty much keep him as like a normal M1 killer for enough time that you just get a good amount of progress. He seems like a killer that's really important to reset against, like trying to wait until the whole team is like non-slipstreamed and has EMPs ready to go and everyone full heals, so that way you can just sort of split up and tackle everything, even if it's 3 4 gen, whatever the case may be. But I think some of the changes, as we'll talk about, will be probably enough this time, I think, to make him in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I just kind of got an idea that it, in some ways, feels kind of like Pig or Wesker in that he has built-in slowdown where if you need to reset, you're gonna have to EMP first, or else everybody's gonna get slipstreamed, and then the Hux will have total free reign to be able to teleport. And if you're in the middle of resetting and the killer teleports to you, he could very easily snowball and win the entire match there. So that's an interesting idea that I hadn't thought of before. Just that built-in slowdown of having to go and get an EMP before you go to reset.
Yeah, and like noticing as the killer that like a team is attempting to like go and find EMPs or print a bunch, and like noticing that they're not going to pressure gens at that moment, so you can be aggressive and try to like act more actively seek them out rather than sitting there and holding a 3 gen. Um like that's what makes him feel very different from Skull Merchant, for example. Like I've tried to play that where it's just there really is no incentive to go and be aggressive. Like you have such like an easy ability to reset, and like getting claw trapped and stuff is so beneficial that you're just like, go ahead, like you make the first move. But there's actually a lot of benefit to, as the killer, being more aggressive in spots where you've noticed that the survivor teams are a little bit more on their heels, and a little bit like straying more from doing objectives to like just trying to regroup a little bit.
Yeah, Hux has a really interesting balance of map information, slight area control, but really chase is where he seems to benefit the most. But one of the things that I've noticed is with the map awareness and map control, not necessarily area control, one thing that I've seen is that during the end game, you can place down almost similar to how I do with demo, where I can place two portals at the exit gates. I've seen you do this where you place a biopod at one of the gates and then you go to the other gate. If the survivor goes to the gate that you're at, you can either body block it or you can just pop out of your um, biopod view and attack them. If they go to the other gate that you're actively viewing through the biopod, you can slipstream them and then teleport to them to down them. Or you can, depending on the map, just walk over there. I don't know why you would do that unless they EMP it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're really easily able to control the end game if you get to that point, similar to how I do with demo, where they go to a gate, I'm holding my shred power, I get killer instinct, I can teleport over there right away. And that seems very powerful if you're able to get to that point in the game.
Yeah, and like the EMPs, I haven't really seen survivors like go out of their way to get an EMP before they try to go for an exit gate, because like that makes sense, right? That like a biopod's gonna be sort of like guarding that gate, and if you just disable it with the EMP, the killer, yes, they know that you're there, but you can almost like wait until like if they because they have to tag you and then they have to wait for the cooldown, which is 3 seconds, and then it has to retag you again to get the slipstream. So you can actually like stick a gate for a decent amount of time and then use the EMP, and then that way they can't teleport, and then you can keep
And
finishing the
that'll,
gate.
assuming that they're doing what you described, then you would be locking them in the biopod view for, 2.5 extra seconds,
Yeah.
as if you, or like, as opposed to just immediately using the EMP right away.
But yeah, but what I've just started doing is like if you're setting up for guarding the gates, just put two biopods almost at like diagonals that are far enough so like one EMP can't cover both of them. So that way, if they end up using an EMP while it's guarding a gate, you just switch view to the other one. So that way you can like continue the slipstream, and that should pretty much cover. He's definitely one of the strongest at like stopping gates and stuff, especially if it's like in the end game collapse if you've closed hatch. Like he's, I don't really know how there's really no way I think to like get around it if he's like set up at all. The only thing I think is like, you got like wake up soul survivor, he closes hatch and you were already camping a gate, right? Like yeah, unless he already was accounting for that, there's really not much you can do. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
he's
it's similar to Trapper or Demo placing the traps at the gate before the last gen pops or before hatch is
right.
closed. If you have some preparation for it, then it seems pretty tough to get around. And especially like thinking about maps like the game, if you're able to put biopods on the ceiling facing the gate that are like it's not facing inside the map, then it's really hard for the survivor. They may not even know that the biopod is there.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen games where either you know you as a killer or one of our random teammates as survivor will get tagged and have no idea where the biopod is, and then the killer will teleport to them right away. So in that in-game scenario, it seems pretty similar, pretty reasonable to assume that you may be able to just get some really free downs through people not paying attention or not realizing.
Yeah, like the create that's what I was saying, is like there's a lot of creativity with the environment, and like it's almost like the opposite of Trapper, where Trapper you're constantly looking at the ground to make sure you don't run into them. Like this killer is like the only one in the game that has you more looking up, and there's like a lot of like neat, especially on the new map, right? There's a lot of like cool aesthetic stuff going on, like, but no other killer really has you looking up. Like it feels like a lot of the maps are just like cut off at your like a little bit above your head for the most part.
Billy sometimes will
Oh
have
yeah,
people looking up.
yeah. But it's kind of interesting in like noticing spots on like certain trees and like ways that other trees might get in the way, and like there's like weird line of sight stuff with parts of the environment that you never account for on other killers, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, just before we recorded, Subtle and I were actually doing some custom maps and testing some line of sight blocks, and in particular on the new map, where you can place some biopods to be able to get the slipstream stuff. And there's definitely a lot of depth there and a lot of room for creativity. So I think that the like so for viewers that aren't really familiar with us, we both play Super Smash Brothers Melee, and there's a really nice correlation in Melee between kind of the skill ceiling of what you're able to do with your characters in the game and the reward that you get for it. And I think that the skill ceiling of like how you place your biopods and what angles you're able to get is like pretty high and pretty interesting. But I don't know that the reward is I'm able to get maybe a teleport or a tag that some other people might not be able to get, which it doesn't it's interesting, but I don't know if it's going to be worth, investing 5,000 hours into this killer just to be able to get like one extra teleport.
Yeah, like as someone who plays Huntress a lot, right? Like there's a lot of maps that are like there's a lot of structures that are map specific in terms of how your power interacts with them. So um like, and a lot of it also, the thing with Huntress compared to Hux is that like you're required to still not only hit aim but a lot of times sort of bait survivors movement and hit a timing, whereas this is more just like sort of accruing game knowledge over like a period of time. Like there's certainly plenty of stuff to learn, plenty of like placements and a lot of RNG and stuff with maps as it is. Like there's going to be a lot to learn with the killer, but I think at some point like you are going to hit a cap, and there isn't going like it's just about the knowledge rather than like execution. There isn't like an execution thing to him as much. I mean, there is kind of somewhat like in terms of how quickly hitting a shot, hitting control or whatever your key binding is to switch to the view, and then also depending on where you shot, like sometimes if you shoot up you'll have to like keep in mind pretty quickly that if you switch to that view you have to look down because that's where the survivor will be. Or if you shoot like through shack window, for example, knowing whether they cut like left or right so like where to look to as well. Like there is some execution, but it's a lot more lenient because of like it doesn't take that long to lock on with the view. But
And something we discovered yesterday, I think, and keep in mind that the chapter's only been out for a day and a half at the time of this recording, but we discovered that if the survivor that you're targeting for lock on moves out of range or out of view, it works as a decay, kind of like Ghostface's breakout, right? Where if they move back in range or in view, you won't be starting from zero. It will fill up and then it'll go down so you can refill it. Like you'll already have some progress for it. So uh, that's something to keep in mind with that. Additionally, like comparing to Huntress, it's interesting because with Huntress, you can start to learn player tells like in game. So you can say, okay, every time that we've run this TL, they've taken this particular path. So I can lead my shot in this direction and get the hit. And with Hux, you can do that kind of, but it's more of they're running to this TL. I know that they vaulted in this direction. I've got two different cameras that I can, move into the view of. Which one do I need to go based off of my prediction of what they're going to do? But then you still have to get the teleport and the down, so the reward for doing that isn't as high as somebody like Huntress.
Hmm. Yeah, he also has like a little bit of that like trap style killer to him, where you can sort of set things ahead. Where in terms of like I said, like Shaq is a perfect example. Like it pretty much never hurts to just keep a pod in there, if you can afford it, because a lot of survivors are going to go there or to main building in certain spots. So that's sort of like trying to predict how survivors might try to loop you for later in the match and cover some of the like problem areas that are stronger for survivor. Can feel pretty rewarding. He feels really nice to play. There's a lot there, and I'm not sure how interesting he will stay in terms of like playing as him as like several months go by. But I am interested to see like different clips of people from the community sort of brainstorming different placements of the pods on different maps. Like we have plenty of maps and plenty of different ways that those maps can spawn. So uh, there's a lot of
Yeah,
different
and
combinations.
kind of like what you were saying before, like no killer power interacts in this way. So even old maps that have been around since the start of the game kind of have new life breath breathed into them
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because the way that you can shoot your biopods onto the sides of walls or onto the water tower on Dead Dog or whatnot, it gives some flexibility that we haven't been able to see before. So
Yeah, there's like those.
that could be
Yeah,
interesting.
there's a dimension to those maps that really has never had to be explored, and this killer sort of brings that out, which is cool. Yeah, it's a nice little change of pace.
So let's move on to some of the perks that we think are going to be particularly good or at the very least viable on Hux. The one that I want to start off with is kind of, I say one, but it's a combination of two. I really am more interested in leaning heavier into the chase mechanics of Hux. And so I want to begin the process early. So I think that perks like lethal and corrupt intervention are going to be particularly good on him. Not only are you able to start your chases early, you're able to start slipstreaming or tagging people early on, or learning, okay, they're over here, so I can start setting up my biopods over in this area. Or if I want to play more of a later game setup, I don't think that he's particularly good at 3-genning, which I'm very happy about. But I can still use that information to set up over on this other area of the map. And with lethal, I'll know where they're at. Or if I'm running corrupt, then I kind of wrangle them into another area that I know that they'll be. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like those perks are interesting because there's a like they work in different, like they're accomplishing different goals, right? Corrupt and lethal, where like corrupt is allowing you to do more setup, but lethal wants you to kind of just get right and chase. But the thing to note about it is that you might think, oh, he's much weaker at the beginning of a match because he doesn't have his pod set up. But the survivors are also relatively in a weak point because they don't have EMPs around. So it's almost like that's the only time in the match where you can guarantee like no one will have an EMP to counter my power. So like using lethal and getting into a chase before, sure, if people want to start a match and hop on to try to hasten the printing process, sure, that still takes, over 20 seconds, but it's pretty flexible. Like I think that's something that makes him interesting, is that there's a lot of different ways to sort of play him and use his power, and he interacts with perks in different ways. Like I said, I think both are viable in kind of accomplishing different goals, and I'm sure like different maps require a little bit more setup versus just getting right in chase too. So
Well, and especially if you're running that purple add-on that we've talked about multiple times, being able to start everybody slipstreamed and running lethal so that you can start the action right away, I think is incredibly strong. And like you said, that's the point in time where the survivors don't have access to EMPs. That purple add-on makes it take even longer to get the first ones. There's a green add-on that shows the aura when people take EMPs, which benefits further with Lethal Pursuer. I the more that I'm thinking about it, the more I think that Lethal is better than Corrupt Intervention on him, but they still play a similar role, but Lethal is pretty gross on him, I think. You can start the action early, you get a lot of really solid synergy with a bunch of his best add-ons. I think it's a pretty strong route to go.
Yeah, the add-on where you start slipstreams, I think, makes perfect sense with lethal. Just to try to, it's kind of similar to Wesker's add-on where you start with everyone infected, where it's like at the start of the match you kind of have to prioritize going for the supply cases for either killer. Although I think that the Hux version is a little bit stronger because it makes it, because like with Wesker, all of the supply cases start stocked, right? Like the big downside is that you're going through your inventory since those are a finite resource, whereas the EMPs replenish. But it's the fact that it takes longer allows him to get like more meaningful, I think, early game pressure if depending on survivor spawns. Like if they're grouped up in particular, that could be pretty nasty where you can even just kind of slug and go for a lot of hits and grab as many health states as you can while they're trying to get EMPs in hand. Yeah, he's yeah.
Speaking of slugging, you want to talk about a perk that you have been running on him?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually it kind of goes along with the same logic that I talked about in a previous video where we did the dredge build, where it's like where knockout I think is actually like really useful in terms of getting, yeah, in
Toxic.
terms of getting like a bunch of pressure. But like it's nice because if the knockout allows you to like keep up the pressure, since if you've tagged someone, the last thing you want is to like while you're carrying someone to a hook is for that person to have enough time to run off and either find another survivor who has an EMP and get claims or just grab one themselves. So to be able to like get the down and then continue snowballing and get more hits and knockout taking it longer to recover, but also making it harder for the other teammates that come and find them, allows you to get a lot more pressure and just sort of keep looking around biopods, even if it's a case of just leaving them slugged for a second to go and look around at the pods to try to get some extra tags to maybe force them to go and burn through some EMPs while you're going for the hook. I think both are like pretty viable strategies, so that way they can't find you and set up for a flashlight or a sabo, or especially if they're under a pallet or something like that, set up for a pallet save, things of that nature. But yeah, I think knockout's like pretty nice for him. Like it's not one of those, he's not one of those kills where I think you just like relentlessly slug, but I think it gives you more flexibility where if like an opportunity presents itself, it allows you to more readily jump on it and not feel like you're going to have that pressure as easily relieved.
It's almost similar to Pyramid Head in a way because, to be clear, if you have somebody tagged, they only lose the tag if an EMP is used or if the survivor gets hooked. So if you keep them slugged with knockout or, without, but better with, then you get to choose whether you hook them to take the hook state or you leave them slugged and still have them tagged so you can slipstream teleport to them later. So that gives you some flexibility, similar to Pyramid Head, where you can either choose to keep them tormented or you can use the torment to teleport them to a cage. So it gives the killer that kind of freedom to dictate some of the pace of the match.
Yeah, plus because the slipstream can spread, like an infection can spread between the survivors. If they pick them up real quick and stuff, like the infection doesn't spread if they just go their separate ways. But if they're trying to reset in a situation and you've done enough hits where you've maybe slugged at a couple of different points in the match and you have a bunch of people who are injured, at some point they're going to want to reset those health states. So they're put in a situation where either it's the slipstream's going to spread or they can't heal and then just decide to fan out. And I think pretty much either situation is good for you as the killer in different ways. So there's, I think it just like opens up more like paths to getting enough pressure where it's like you can keep people slipstream by not going for the hook and force people to go and pick them up, but you can also like just sort of take the hook and use that time while they're down to just kind of look through the cans and take opportunities if they present themselves. You're not like, you don't really have to force anything similar, like maybe like how Twins just sort of like always kind of just keeps going with Victor until you either latch on or they you miss a shot and they kick or something. But it's kind of similar to that, where it's just you take hits until they aren't like sort of handed to you.
Yeah, the idea of transferring the slipstream when picking somebody up is kind of leading me to the next perk that I want to talk about on him, which is Sloppy Butcher. It's a fantastic perk on most killers. Certainly every M1 killer, it's very solid on. But for the similar idea, and similar to what we were talking about before, where it's similar to Pig, I feel, in the slowdown, where you are really incentivized to go and use an EMP or at least get one before you go to reset, that just amplifies with Sloppy, where if they don't EMP and they're in the middle of a heal, and this also works kind of for Septic Touch also, where if they don't use an EMP and they're working on a heal and then you do teleport to them, then the hemorrhage will reset the healing amount. Septic Touch would make them oblivious, and it is a really good way of controlling the health states throughout the course of the match. And as an M1 killer, you're gonna apply that on every health state that you take.
Yeah, it just makes, I mean, for him as someone who's just like he doesn't have a real like M2 that damages in a way. Like he's still like it allows you to get closer and make progress, but at the end of the day you still have to M1 them. So to make your each M1 like hit a little bit harder, and also with the hemorrhage like allowing you sort of that flexibility, like if you wanted to run some sort of aura reading, nurses calling, or something else information wise to try to kind of swoop in there and interrupt hits, that'll make your sloppy pay off a lot more. And it also like you have to heal for a longer period of time, so it keeps survivors grouped up for longer, which is always a good thing as killer. So I think like it just sort of magnifies his M1s a little bit more and makes them mean a little bit more for each hit that you get, which is always a good thing. One of the things that I was going to talk about is actually Game of Foot. I've been running on some killers a combination of Game of Foot with Save the Best for Last, where as you kind of get downs on non-obsessions, usually since you've been chasing them for a while, it'll sort of transfer the obsession to them, so that way you're freed up to go for anyone. But with just Game of Foot, I think that the fact that the obsession sort of changes and the to be able to kick stuff faster, and also get the haste from pallets that are broken, including like if it gets thrown on you when you're in the overclock mode, getting the additional haste and sort of negating a bit of that hinder that you get from getting hit by a pallet. There's a lot of like ways that it sort of just allows you to keep sort of churning through resources, and that's something that he's already really good at, in terms of like sort of forcing survivors to throw a lot of pallets in a short amount of time. But I think this just like ups it a little bit further, and being able to, obviously the perk being able to just sort of switch the obsession allows some additional synergies if you want it. But even by itself, I think is a pretty uniquely good perk for him.
Yeah, the speed burst that you get when you break the pallet during overcharge after teleporting to somebody amplifies his chase potential even more. And the overcharge, if somebody breaks a pallet or throws a pallet on you, you break it immediately, but you also can just run up to one and shred it immediately and still be in overcharge for a little bit longer. It synergizes really well with his power.
Yeah, like being able to run that like even with like brutal and stuff, like I've been kind of combining the two. It's just like when you teleport, you get the overclock, and then you just literally kick something. You're kicking it super fast and also getting the haste, where it's almost impossible that they're gonna, like, you're basically guaranteeing a hit for a power that like is very strong but doesn't always guarantee a hit if they're near a resource. It usually will sort of guarantee that they're forced to burn a pallet if that's the case, or get the hit. But it kind of guarantees both, where like if they're at the pallet you can break it, but you're still going to likely catch up before they can get to something else.
Yeah. The last perk that I really want to talk about is I think that Tinkerer is particularly strong on him. If we're already theorizing that you're able to make biopods in locations that survivors may not expect through map knowledge, or like we were talking about on the game during the end game where you're placing them near the gates away from the map. If you're able to do that when a Tinker or Proc goes off and you're able to go into that biopod and slipstream to the survivor, not only will you get notified of where to look in your biopod, but you'll be undetectable. So if you come out of it, you may be able to get a really sneaky hit on somebody. And I think that that can be really good for kind of patrolling gens without having to actually patrol gens. Like we've said before, I don't think that this killer is particularly good at 3-genning, which I'm happy about, but it does allow for you to kind of have that knowledge of where you need to be focusing on the map passively, just as the game progresses. And for that reason, I do want to say I don't think that the gen can kick perks are particularly strong for him for that same reason. So, uh, like as far as gen regression goes, I would probably default to pain res and deadlock and those kind of perks as opposed to the overcharge, the Call of Brine, maybe even pop. Pop is very good now, but I'm gonna lean away from the gen kick perks for him. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, I've been using Jolt a good amount, especially with Knockout, where it's just like you're just getting downs more than getting hooks, where that would fuel stuff like Pain Res or Pop. I think that like Call of Brine, because of the info part of it, could fulfill a similar role, or like Surveillance or something, where it's like you maybe you kick it once and then you're sort of for a while where you can like, oh, that gen's being worked on, I just got that notification, let me switch to the pod and get the tag, like before they can even realize, or something like that. Not that like, yeah, I don't think that he's mobile enough to just be like kicking gens rapid. Like you can't get to the gen fast unless the survivor's already there, and if they're cross map, like they're probably not going to let you, they're not going to stay in a position long enough in most cases where the biopod hits them with the slipstream, gets through the cooldown, and then you lock on again to get the actual teleport. They're probably going to get out of the way before that happens. So you still have to like just walk it yourself essentially to get to the gen, which I think limits his synergy with those gen kick perks. But for ones that maybe you just have to kick once and then it sort of guards it for you for a while, like Surveillance or Call of Brine, I could see those sort of working. But yeah, I've just been relying more on stuff like that's more passive, like Jolt, where you just get the downs, and that way you can just play more down oriented than Hook. Um, and stuff that's more passive, like Deadlock and things like that, I think are always gonna allow him to just sort of focus more on the chase, which is what he's mostly good at. But
Any other perks that you want to talk about for Hux for now?
not really. I think like I lean more in, like you said, I think more of the chase stuff is interesting. I think anything like, Bamboozle or Superior Anatomy, any of those vault things, Brutal, and all those kind of things are pretty nice. But uh yeah, just kind of stuff along those lines. I think more than the slowdown is good for him.
Oh, well, the last thing that we wanted to talk about as far as the killer goes is Behavior tweeted recently that they're already planning on nerfing the EMPs a little bit more. So currently there are 5 boxes for the EMPs. They're going to down that to 4. The activation time to start up an EMP is currently 2 seconds. They're going to be increasing that to 2.5. And when you're charging it, the survivor is going to be slowed down, but we don't know by how much. So it is going to be even harder to get EMPs, which is fine. I think the EMPs still seem extremely strong. I I don't remember if we talked about this last episode or between last episode and this one, but I had the idea of increasing the number of boxes available, but when you're holding an EMP, when you take one, the next one doesn't refill or even start to refill until that one has been used. So I feel like that maybe is a different route that they could have gone about it, but we'll see how this goes.
Right, like having an EMP like tied to the case that it came from, and like once that
Exactly.
EMP has been used, then it starts recharging. I think they also said in that tweet that they're considering upping the recharge time of the box slightly. I know it's at like 90 seconds right now, so I don't really know. I like if they tweak all the numbers very slightly, I think that that's pretty much all it needs. It just feels like a little too easy for survivors to get their hands on an EMP if they're willing to like respect the threat of his power. But I think these are good, and we can kind of see how it plays out. They seem more willing to more like quickly make changes, and if this turns out to be too much or something, and he becomes too oppressive in some sort of way, they can maybe find a halfway point, or like you said, redesign it in a way that's a little bit different and try some things out. I don't think that they have to change. I think that the way that the pods work and that his power works is good. I think if you just have to make sure that the EMPs are like in a healthy balance. If there's too few of them, then he's going to become too oppressive. But like we seen on the PTB, and now if they're too sort of frequent and easy to acquire, then the killer doesn't really have like a power in a lot of situations. I know that's kind of like the general complaint is like it feels like at times that they just always have EMPs and you don't have a power, and that's never good.
Yeah. Well, moving on from the killer side, we also got Gabriel Soma, the new survivor. There came some new skins, some new perks. The perks we went over before, not much feeling about two of the three. Uh, we did want to talk about how what is the name of the perk? Made for this. I'll let you talk about this because you're the one that brought this up. You have some
Sure.
feelings about it.
Yeah, so and I know I'm not the only one to have voiced this, but like they're the clips of the made for this clips generally are is that perk combined with multiple other haste effects to try to like make you as fast as or even slightly faster than the killers, generally with hope and some other combination of stuff, whether it's like blood pact or power of two or dark theory, different things like that, where it's just but hope is like the big one that's like 7%, which is like that's what makes the bigger difference. Like if you were to only pick one perk to give you haste, hope is giving you at one is making you 107. Like made for this is making you 103 and only in the injured state, whereas like hope and made for this is like going from 107 to 110, which is as fast as the 4.4 killers. Not that that's insignificant, but it feels like people are focusing on the smaller percentage perk and being like, see what this perk is like capable of. And it's like, you basically could already do that with like I don't understand. I see these clips of Hope, Blood Pact, and Made for this, and I'm like, Blood Pact and Hope are the overwhelm like they're like 85-90% of the haste effect that's being applied to the survivor. How is that those things are like, oh, those are fine, it's made for this, see that made for this is the problem. And I don't really understand. Like I get that,
And
like, yeah, it's crazy how much speed you can get, but I don't understand how made for this is like the scapegoat and all this of like that's the problem perk.
the only argument I'll make for that is you can get the 3% haste from Made for This throughout the entirety of the match, so it's more consistent. Because, like, there are tons of games where you'll just never get any kind of hope value because you don't make it to the end game. However, the result of that consistency is that the effect is way less, to your point. If we're talking about 7% for hope and 3% for Made for This, that's literally just 30%. I say 30, like, or just 30. Like, 30% is a significant amount, but hope is more than double the speed that you get, the bonus speed. So, and in addition to that, for these builds that are running hope, Made for This, dark theory, and blood pact, that's your entire build. What we were talking about before with another perk that we'll talk about in just a second, the people who were losing their mind over it are just doing this one thing and they're not doing anything else extra for the rest of the match in any other regard. You're not healing people faster, you're not doing generators faster, you're not getting better information, you're not looping the killer any better for, a majority of the time. So you're sacrificing your entire build for this, albeit very powerful in the particular situation. I remember, for example, uh, TikTok at Subtle, that we made a clip where we loaded into a custom when Circle of Healing first came out, where we had Circle of Healing, multiple Circle of Healings.
Yeah, when they
We're Gonna
stacked.
Live Forever, Botany Knowledge, the old version, and we were picking people up faster than the killer could down them. But that's not gonna happen in a
Right.
game.
Yeah,
And
like you're putting it in
and
like a very
we
like box, like you're putting it in a vacuum, and it's just like
right.
you're not showing all of the situations that arise over the course of a typical match.
Exactly. And like these made for this clips definitely happen in game, but they're to the detriment of the rest of your game, and you're dedicating everything to it. And it looks fun, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't think it's problematic. They have said, the devs have said that before the release even happened, that it's something that they're looking at and that they're aware that it may be problematic, but I don't think that that's the part that's problematic.
Yeah, I don't really like I don't see how like if people are posting these clips hoping that like the devs pay attention and are like, "Oh my god, we got to change it." Like I don't understand how you can watch those clips and be like this one perk that gives the 3% as opposed to like the other two that give like 12 or 14% or whatever the combination is like I don't understand how the 3% is the one that's the problem. And I'm not saying that those other perks are a problem. I just don't understand how you can like sort of put everything together and then like that ingredient is the one that needs to be taken out. Like I just don't
Yeah,
really.
so imagine like botany knowledge of plus 50%, and we'll make it of plus 100%, and we're gonna live forever of plus 100%. But then desperate measures,
Right, yeah.
oh damn, that gives 14% if one person is injured. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, that little extra percent now that that's an option is tipping the scales. Where it's just like, I just don't understand the argument in that case. And you know, I'm not saying like it's similar to arguments that we've tried to talk about with like dark theory, where it's like it's such a small percentage, but yes, if it barely gets you through a window or a pallet, or like similar with like resilience with a vault, where like if it dodges a health state in a match, like that is very meaningful.
Right.
But getting
That extends your chase a lot.
yeah, but having that happen multiple times in the course of a match where that little tiny bit is what mattered is pretty unlikely that it's going to happen so often that like it's just dominating a match. Like it's just too small of a percentage, and generally stuff is too spread out. And in a lot of cases, honestly, like yes, it can make like there's times where like you don't even need the percentage. Like there's plenty of times like you said, like with like hope, right? Like if there's going to be matches where you don't even get value out of the perk, you're going to have matches where that 3% never got you any real value. So it's also like a 10 perk. Like you could have run something like sprint burst, right? That like doesn't synergize with it, but sprint burst got you out of a situation, or lithe or bounce landing, any sort of exhaustion perk that gives you like the bigger speed boost and dodges a hit, that could give you better value than what this perk is going to do in terms of how many times, or even how like consistently between like all of your matches that it's going to actually get value.
Yep. Okay, so I've got a question for you, Subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Since the release, as a killer, how many survivors in your match have been running Scavenger aside from people doing adepts?
Maybe two, maybe it's one or two. I think I've played
Okay,
a lot.
and as survivor, how many of your teammates have been running Scavenger aside from adepts?
I'm pretty sure same thing, one or two, maybe.
Yeah, I have seen literal one.
Yeah.
So turns out all of the people trying the end of times for Scavenger and how old Scavenger was busted and how this one is a buff.
Better. Yeah, definitely better.
Who could have
Crazy.
foreseen this?
Wow,
Who could have
crazy.
possibly foreseen this? Perk's bad.
Yeah.
And we're not saying it for a reason, because it's bad. It's bad and it's not fun.
I've seen people with brand new parts and good toolboxes not running Scavenger because it doesn't do anything. And yes, I get people are going to try to argue that like, oh, well maybe they just haven't unlocked it yet or didn't get the character yet. It's only a couple days. There are people there. I've seen plenty of people playing the new character. I've been seen plenty of people running the other two teachables and not running Scavenger on their other survivors, but that one's not popping up, and it's because the perk really doesn't do anything. And I'm sure someone's gonna try. I'm sure there's gonna be content creators that try and you know bring it back from the grave and be like, look at this gen. Look at these gen speed. It's crazy. Look at what we did when we brought
See,
four
that's the thing
toolboxes and
is
like
when Hyperfocus got released, you had that like quick clip worthy, oh, I'm doing this entire gen in 40 seconds. If you get like good value out of Scavenger, it's not something like that. So I don't even think that content creators are going to go for that kind of play. A, because it's bad and it doesn't work, but B, because it's not like clip worthy. You know, that's the thing about Made for This, for example, is it's very clip worthy. You see the survivor looping the killer and gaining distance on them, but I mean, Scavenger is bad, and you don't get that kind of immediate feedback of how good or bad it is.
yeah, and I don't even think that the perk is interesting in a way that it'll be like, like something that's pretty common is trying to do some sort of synergy and some sort of build that like showcases a relatively obscure perk or a perk that maybe just got buffed and people want to show like what's capable with it. I think that like I think if anything, you'd see probably like deja vu combined with other gen speed stuff to be like, look at what we can do to break a 3 gen, and they show how fast like two people did a generator with proof thyself and two deja vus and something like that, like to basically save a match or something like that. But like I just don't see
Friendly
that.
competition.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Friendly competition. Yeah, like there's so many other things that are more meaningful, and I just don't see how Scavenger fits into any of those kind of situations. It just it it like make it basically gives you a debuff that you could just not get. You could just run the toolbox without the perk and then not have to sit through a 30-second debuff. We still have to test actually. We could still test on how much what the 50% debuff actually does to the amount of the charges that you end up losing out on in terms of the gen, but we know it's
yeah,
around.
I've thought about that. I know
Yeah,
how we can test that, but
yeah, it's
we can talk
just
about that after.
yeah, it's just not it's not going to do anything. It's going to fall into obscurity like many other perks, and that sucks. And I don't think that the previous version was really going to do anything either. But this perk definitely didn't get buffed from the PTB, and it's gotten nerfed so badly that like it's just never going to be run. You're not going to see it other than probably as soon as a new tome drops that has a depleted toolbox sort of thing. There'll probably be people who try to do that with Built to Last for whatever reason, even though Built to Last is better at it. But I'm sure people will try to fit it in there somehow, but it's nothing. It's a bad perk. I don't know what else to say about it.
Yep. Speaking of bad, we also have the new map.
Yeah.
It is better than the PTB because they have removed a lot of the clutter. It's still cluttered, but it's less. Uh, Main building hasn't been changed. It's still, in my opinion, extremely survivor favored. I love it because I get to run Balanced Landing, and it's amazing on that map, or in particular on that main building. But I think the biggest drawing point to kind of the interest of this map is places that you can place your biopods as the new killer.
Yeah, I mean the like
That's about
again,
it.
the aesthetics to the map are really cool. This it's very, if you care about feeling immersed in a map, this one I think does it probably better than any map that they have currently. It just, aside from maybe feeling like you're in a map from your favorite horror franchise, right? Whatever licensed character, this one just like has a lot of cool sound effects, has the like shadows from the creatures flying overhead. The sky like looks
Yeah.
insane. I
There's
even
the sound of like plants
mhm.
pulling back as you run up to them,
I even
which has thrown me off because as a demo player, it sounds almost like the portals or like when you're teleporting through, and I'm like, wait a second. Oh,
Yeah, there's this little tiny. There's a random Easter egg that I found by accident. That there's a little like spider like against somewhere on like the edge of the map, and I'm sure there's multiple of them. It's like a little spider-looking creature that's on the rock like wall at the edge of the map, and it just like kind of turns in place and crawls. But if you walk up and like right next to it, it just like bares its teeth at you while you're standing next to it, and then when you walk away it goes back and then just like does its little patrol thing. Like there's really cool like
that's
weird
hype.
interactions. Yeah, like it
That's
reminds
almost
me.
like the rats on Hawkins,
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, or like the weird like how the heads turn on Sanctum, right?
Yamaoka.
Like yeah, like there's weird like map interactions. That kind of stuff is really cool. I wish there would be,
Yeah.
or the or on Midwich when the body like flops out of the locker if you go
Mhm.
past it, things like that. Like those kind of things are cool, and they did that a lot with this map, which is neat. So but in terms of, they cleared up the collision issues that Billy had. I've seen a lot of Hillbilly players saying that like you can play the video game, which is a crazy concept.
Amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of like trying to figure out, this is like this is not a map that you're going to be able to like easily learn from just casually queuing into matches and just get it a few times. Like it's really confusing. The main building is always oriented in the same way. Like not only does the inside not change, but it doesn't turn, which is great. That helps a lot for consistency. And Shack only has the one spawn. I know that's like generally the case, but Sanctum is like a weird exception. And they've been trying to do like weird things lately, but there's just like there's weird ramps and stuff that are like one way that they've introduced on this map. No breakable walls, which is cool, but it's very hard. It's very easy to like get lost. Like main building is like a way to ground yourself and be like, okay, this is the center of the map and this is how like everything is facing, but
And it's
it's
kinda
tricky.
it's almost the opposite of Borgo, where I'm having trouble, or I guess not really the opposite. It's the same but in a different way as Borgo, where on Borgo I'm looking out of the bounds of the map, and it's the same kind of flatness with like a small wall. So if I don't see that small wall, then I think I'm running into the map when I'm actually running to the bounds of it. And with this map, there are more tall doodads in the middle of the map, and the border of the map is just a wall. And so similarly, I think I'm running towards like tall doodads in the middle of the map, but I'm actually running towards the edge of it.
Yeah, it almost like the way that the map is built, it almost like feels like you're in a giant like crater where like there's like the large like you're inside like a canyon sort of crater looking thing with just like a long, huge, tall like rock walls sort of going up the sides. But it's very hard to even see where those are because there's so much like random clutter on the map that like trying to see where an exit gate is or like looking for some sort of landmarker in the distance, like there's just going to be too much stuff in the way that and the maybe at some point we'll recognize the plant types or something over time, but like for now it all just feels the same.
Yeah. Speaking of Billy being able to play the game, Weskers cannot play the game.
Yes.
Wesker was very, very bugged. We discovered on Twitter clips and then ran into it in game multiple times where he would just become invisible. Congratulations, you're now playing Nurse mixed with Spirit.
Yeah.
Um, so he was originally going to get kill switched on Tuesday. Then their kill switch didn't work, so we had to put up with him until Wednesday. But he is now kill switched. No word on when he will be unkill switched. Could be, next week when they do the anniversary event. More likely, it'll be further on the line. Uh, there was a period of time where Nurse was kill switched for like what 2 months,
Yeah.
something like that. I would be surprised if they let it last that long. Wesker is far and away the most played killer by all metrics, and a major driver for people to play Dead by Daylight. A lot of people got into Dead by Daylight because of the Resident Evil chapters. So I think that they are very incentivized to fix Wesker to keep up their gameplay retention. But we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah, I mean, at least in like Nurse's case, it was sort of planned where they were trying to like recode the killer from the ground up, so that way it was like less buggy, because they always had like when new maps would come out or they redesigned them, she had like weird collision things where she couldn't blink through stuff, so they tried to like rebuild her, but it took forever. Yeah, I would be surprised if this was fixed by the anniversary, which is bad
Yeah.
for them because it's the anniversary event. Um, my guess is, yeah, I would think 2 weeks, like a minimum, in terms of like from when it was kill switched from. So we're probably looking at like a full week after the anniversary drops on the 21st. But yeah, I just their like explanation of like, oh well, we have our outsourced company that we use for our kill switch like ran out of resources to kill switch things, and I'm like, what is that? Why would you even complicate it? Why wouldn't you like not say, why wouldn't you just be like, we were running into an issue with the kill switch, it'll be kill switch tomorrow? Like the explanation was like
Self-report.
bizarre. Yeah, it's just like I don't understand. Like you don't have it. Like it was bizarre because it wasn't like we're experiencing a technical issue. It was like, oh well, it's out of our hands. You know, we report to some other company that kill switches for us. That's how we do our kill switch. I'm just like, you don't have control of this thing in house, which I guess explains why, somewhat why things don't get kill switched for some reason. But like it was a source of frustration because it also was like they announced that they were kill switching and then we're like, just kidding, we can't. And then it felt like Weskers were like, oh my god, we're gonna lose Wesker for like, I don't know, a month, gotta get all our Wesker games in. And that's when we started seeing that, even though it was the release of a new killer, everyone was trying to play Wesker, it felt like.
Yeah. Uh, all right. So, like we talked about on Wednesday, June 21st, is going to be the 7th year anniversary event. We're going to have some new cosmetics that you can get, some more masks similar to last year's event. And then there's going to be some chaos.
The wrinkle in this event.
Yeah, we'll see how it works, but we've gotten teases of alternate ways of like rebuilding pallets and exposing survivors in different ways, and I don't know, it's gonna be an adventure.
Yeah, it's hard to because they kind of tease that like you'd be able to burn your invitation for one of these like random effects with like Survivor can like place a pallet, which I assume, my only guess, the thing that jumps to mind is like Pallet Freddy, where they're just like a pallet can go here, you're near it, you want to use this, it'll like show an aura or something. You can also like put an entity blocker for the killer in a window, and killers can expose you as soon as they get bloodlust, and I'm sure that's like not even all of it. Like it feels, I'm sure that there's gonna be some. It sounds, it's. I want to say that it sounds cool, but I'm afraid it's gonna get. I'm afraid that it's either gonna like it's either gonna be sick and it's gonna be like, oh, this is so chaotic in a cool way and like offers such creativity, or it's just gonna be like, oh my god, give us the vanilla game back, please. Like this is too much. Like it's not gonna probably fall anywhere in between. It's gonna be one of the extremes, and I'm hoping it's cool. Hopefully it's fun and a
Well,
change of pace and
if it
makes
is
it fresh.
miserable, it's only a limited event, and if it's cool, we'll get it for like a couple weeks or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but uh anything else that you want to bring up at this point?
That pretty much covered it. I think we were supposed to
Yeah.
get like, we'll probably get an event like tome of one of those temporary ones. I know that they did the community challenges and
Yeah.
stuff, so I'm sure that
Yeah,
that
they
kind of
did
thing
that
will be
last
back.
year.
I know they had the
I think that they talked about that at some point, like multiple months ago. So I think that it would be cool to have some of that again.
yeah, especially because like now I'm almost fully caught up on this current tome, so it'll be nice to get some fresh challenges and ways to get blood points. And I think last year they put like the dredge and Hattie had like the cosmetic pieces scattered throughout the two tomes that got unlocked over a couple weeks. So um yeah, it'll be cool and give us some community stuff to work on while the chaos is happening in the actual matches.
Yeah, and for those that weren't here, I think it was last year's, they made a challenge like
Oh,
so absurdly impossible to do that they had to adjust it. I think it was like
I think
hook.
most of them they had to reduce, but some of them like had to be reduced a lot.
Yeah,
Like
there was one in particular I remember that was like hook 14 million survivors or something like that. And it was like not anywhere close. Like it got to the end of that and the community was at like it was at some ridiculously low fraction of whatever the
yeah, I was
challenge
like they
actually
made it like
was.
20 or 25% of what the original
Yeah.
goal was supposed to be because we were
So
not close.
we'll see if they set appropriate expectations this year.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was a pretty funny little faux pas that they made.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly. But
but if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Subtle, how can they do that?
at Z Subtle on pretty much everything. I've been posting on TikTok pretty regularly. Just was editing actually a bunch of clips over the past few days, so I have a new batch of stuff to upload for the next few weeks and carry me through the beginning of the anniversary most likely. But yeah, you can find me there.
Cool. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at ScrapBrainSE2 or join me on Twitch at ScrapBrainSE2. And we'll be back at you next week for the event, and we'll let you know what's going on with that. So everybody have a good night. Thanks for joining us. See you later.
Later.